You're not stuck because you have too much to do. You're stuck because your brain thinks you have to do it all at once. Lucas Bennett stood in the dim glow of his apartment, staring at a wall covered edge to edge with sticky notes. Each one a task he swore he would finish, each one a quiet reminder that he hadn't. The notes weren't random. They were organized, color-coded, carefully written in clean handwriting. Goals for work, fitness plans, side projects, books to read, skills to learn, a life he wanted but somehow never touched. Every morning he woke up with the same intention. Today is the day. He would make coffee, sit at his desk, open his laptop, and look at the list. And that's when it happened. The weight, invisible but crushing, like trying to carry 100 pounds with one hand. His mind would jump from task to task. Start this. No, start that. What about the bigger goal? What if you do it wrong? What if you waste time? Minutes passed, then hours, and by noon he had done nothing but think. By evening the guilt settled in, heavy and familiar. He would tell himself he just needed better focus, more discipline, a better system. So he added more notes, more structure, more pressure. But the more he planned, the less he moved. And the strangest part was this. From the outside, Lucas looked busy. His calendar was full, his desk covered in ideas, his mind constantly working. But his life wasn't changing, not inch by inch, not mile by mile. It was standing still, like a car with the engine running but the brakes locked tight. Night after night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the same quiet question in his head. Why can't I just start? He wasn't lazy. He knew that. He had ambition. He had vision. He had everything people said you needed, except one thing he couldn't explain, the ability to take the first step. And the longer it went on, the more dangerous the pattern became, because slowly, without realizing it, Lucas stopped trusting himself. Every unfinished task wasn't just a missed action. It was proof that maybe he wasn't the kind of person who followed through. Maybe he was just another guy with big ideas and no results. And that thought, more than the list, more than the work, was what kept him frozen in place. The next morning looked exactly like every morning before it. The same desk, the same cold cup of coffee, the same wall staring back at him like a scoreboard he was losing to. Lucas sat down and told himself this time would be different. He opened his laptop, pulled up his task list, and for a brief moment, he felt that familiar spark, the illusion of control, the belief that today he would finally catch up. He picked one task, just one. Something simple, something he had been avoiding for weeks. But the moment his fingers hovered over the keyboard, the noise started again. What about the other tasks? What if this is not the most important one? What if you spend an hour on this and it does not matter? Maybe you should plan more. Maybe you should reorganize first. Maybe you should wait until you feel ready. And just like that, the energy drained out of him, replaced by hesitation, then distraction, then silence. Minutes slipped into an hour, and before he knew it, he was scrolling through his phone, telling himself he was taking a short break. But deep down he knew what was happening. He was escaping the weight of starting, escaping the pressure of doing it right, escaping the fear that even if he tried, it would not be enough. And this was the part no one saw, not his friends, not his coworkers, not even his family, because from the outside, Lucas looked like someone who had everything under control. He talked about his goals, he shared his plans, he knew exactly what he wanted. But inside, he was stuck in a loop he could not break. Plan, delay, feel guilty, repeat, every single day. And the worst part was not the lack of progress. It was the quiet erosion of his confidence. Every unfinished task whispered the same message. You cannot trust yourself. You do not follow through. You are all ideas and no action. And slowly, almost without noticing, Lucas began to believe it. He started lowering his expectations, telling himself maybe he just needed more time. Maybe he was not ready yet. Maybe someday things would click. But deep down, there was a growing tension, a feeling that time was moving whether he did or not. That while he stood still, life was quietly passing him by. And that realization, that subtle, uncomfortable truth, began to press against him harder than any task on that wall ever could. That night something inside Lucas shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, uncomfortable way that he could not ignore. He sat at his desk long after midnight, the room dim except for the soft glow of his laptop screen. The wall of notes still there, still full, still untouched, but this time he was not looking at the tasks. He was looking at himself, really looking. And for the first time, he stopped asking why he could not start and began asking a different question. What am I avoiding? The answer did not come right away, but he could feel it, just beneath the surface, a tension, a resistance, like his mind was protecting him from something he did not want to face. He leaned back in his chair and let the silence settle. No music, no scrolling, no distractions, just him and the weight of that question, and slowly, piece by piece, the truth started to form. It was not the tasks themselves. It was what they represented. Each item on that wall was not just something to do. It was a test, a chance to prove something. To prove he was capable, disciplined, consistent, and that pressure made every task feel heavier than it actually was. Because if he started and failed, it would confirm his worst fear, that he was not who he thought he could be. And so his brain did something subtle but powerful. It delayed, it distracted, it protected him from that moment of truth by never letting him reach it. And suddenly the pattern made sense. It was never about time, never about energy, never about having the perfect system. It was fear, quiet, disguised, but always there. Fear of doing it wrong, fear of not finishing, fear of seeing that maybe effort would not lead to the result he wanted. And the realization hit him harder than anything before. He was not stuck because his list was too long. He was stuck because every item on that list felt like a judgment waiting to happen, and the only way to avoid that judgment was to never begin. He looked back at the wall, the same notes, the same tasks, but they felt different now, not because they had changed, but because he could finally see what was underneath them. And for the first time in a long time, the problem was clear, but clarity did not make it easier. If anything, it made it more uncomfortable, because now he could not hide behind excuses. Now he knew that what was holding him back was not outside of him. It was inside, and that meant the next move would have to be different. Not another plan, not another list, but something much smaller, something that did not trigger that same resistance, something that his mind would not fight against. And as that thought formed, quiet but sharp, Lucas leaned forward in his chair, staring at a single note on the wall, not the biggest one, not the most important one, just one. And for a moment, everything else faded away. Lucas reached out slowly and peeled one sticky note from the wall, just one. A small task he had ignored for weeks. It read, organize project files. Nothing complicated, nothing impressive, just something simple. But as he held it in his hand, the familiar pressure crept back in, telling him this mattered, telling him it had to be done right, telling him it was not enough, and he felt it again. That hesitation, that invisible force that had stopped him 100 times before. His fingers tightened around the note, as if he was about to drop it. His mind already searching for an escape. Maybe later, maybe after coffee, maybe when he felt more ready. But this time something felt different, not stronger, not more motivated, just more aware. He could see the pattern happening in real time, like watching himself from the outside, and that made it harder to ignore. He walked to his desk, sat down, and placed the note in front of him, not looking at the wall anymore, not thinking about the other tasks, just this one. But even then, his mind tried to pull him away, reminding him of everything else he had not done, everything else he was behind on. The weight of the entire list trying to collapse back onto this single moment. And for a second, he almost gave in, almost stood up, almost went back to doing nothing. But instead, he did something he had never done before. He made the task smaller, not in theory, not in planning, but in action. He opened his laptop and said quietly to himself, just a few minutes, not the whole task, not the perfect result, just a few minutes. And even that felt strange, almost pointless, because his brain was used to thinking in big outcomes, finished projects, complete transformations, not small beginnings. But he stayed. His fingers moved slowly at first, opening folders, renaming one file, then another. Nothing impressive, nothing worth celebrating. But something was happening beneath the surface, something subtle but real. The resistance was not as strong. The fear was quieter, because the stakes were smaller. He was not trying to prove anything. He was just moving. And for the first time in a long time, movement felt possible. Minutes passed, not many, just enough to notice that he had not stopped, that he had not run away. And when he leaned back in his chair, something unexpected hit him. Not pride, not excitement, but relief. The kind of relief that comes when something heavy lifts, even just a little. He looked at the note in front of him again, still not finished, still incomplete, but no longer untouched, and that difference, as small as it seemed, felt bigger than anything he had experienced in months. Lucas sat there longer than he expected, staring at the screen, the file he had just touched still open, still incomplete, but no longer something he had avoided, and that small shift began to echo in his mind, not as a loud realization, but as a quiet question. What just happened? It did not feel like a breakthrough. It did not feel like success, but it did not feel like failure either. It felt neutral, almost ordinary, and that was new, because before, every task felt heavy, meaningful, loaded with expectation. But this time, it was just a few minutes, just a small action, and somehow that changed everything about how it felt. He leaned forward again, almost curious now, and continued, not because he had to, not because he forced himself, but because it no longer felt impossible. A few more files, a few more clicks, and then he stopped, not exhausted, not overwhelmed, just done for the moment. And as he closed his laptop, something unusual happened. The usual guilt did not show up. There was no voice telling him he had not done enough, no pressure reminding him of everything left undone, just a quiet sense that he had moved, even if only a little, and that feeling stayed with him the rest of the night, subtle but persistent, like a shift he could not fully explain. The next morning, the wall was still there, just as full as before, but Lucas did not look at all of it this time. He looked for one note, just one, and when he found it, he did the same thing. He sat down and told himself, just a few minutes. Nothing more, no pressure, no expectation, just begin. And again, the resistance was there, but weaker, less convincing, easier to move through. And again, something small got done, not finished, not perfect, just started, and then repeated. And over the next few days, something began to change, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice, but inside, the pattern was breaking. The loop that had kept him stuck was loosening, because he was no longer trying to conquer the entire list. He was stepping into it, one small piece at a time, and that difference, that shift from everything to something, from pressure to permission, began to reshape how he saw the work in front of him. The tasks did not shrink, but the weight they carried did, and for the first time in a long time, Lucas was not standing still. He was moving, slowly, quietly, but consistently, and that consistency, fragile as it was, felt more powerful than any burst of motivation he had ever relied on before. At first, Lucas thought he had found the answer, something simple, something manageable, something that did not overwhelm him the moment he looked at it. But as the days went on, he realized it was not that easy, because even though the steps were smaller, the resistance had not disappeared. It had only changed its shape. Some mornings he still sat there, staring at a single task, feeling that familiar hesitation creep back in, telling him to wait, to delay, to do something easier. And there were days when he gave in, days when 10 minutes turned into nothing at all, and the old pattern tried to return, whispering that this was not working, that he was the same person he had always been, stuck, inconsistent, unreliable, and for a moment, he believed it. He felt that old weight again, that pressure to prove something, to fix everything at once. But this time, something was different. He caught it earlier, before it took over completely. He recognized the voice, not as truth, but as habit, and instead of fighting it, instead of trying to force himself into a perfect routine, he went back to something smaller, something almost too simple to take seriously. Just a few minutes. That was it. No expectations, no outcome. Just begin. And even when it felt pointless, even when it felt like it would not make a difference, he did it anyway. And slowly, something unexpected started to happen, not in the tasks themselves, but in how he experienced them. The fear was still there, but it no longer stopped him completely. The pressure still existed, but it no longer controlled his decisions, because he was no longer trying to win in one move. He was just trying to move at all. And that shift changed everything about how he showed up each day. Some days were easy, some days were not. But the rule stayed the same. Start small, stay with it, and let the rest follow. And over time, something subtle began to build, not motivation, not excitement, but trust. Trust that he could begin, trust that he would not run away the moment things felt uncomfortable, Trust that progress did not have to be dramatic to be real, and that trust, fragile at first, began to replace the doubt that had been there for so long. And for the first time, Lucas was not trying to become a different person overnight. He was becoming someone who could take one step, then another, even when it felt small, even when it felt slow, because he had finally understood something he had missed before. That consistency does not come from doing everything right. It comes from not stopping when it feels hard. Even if all you can manage is a few minutes at a time. After a few weeks, something almost unnoticeable began to shift, not in a dramatic, overnight transformation, but in the quiet patterns of his days. Lucas no longer stood frozen in front of the wall each morning. He no longer felt that immediate wave of pressure the moment he sat down. Instead, he would walk to his desk, pick a single note, and begin without thinking too much about it. And that was the difference. He was no longer negotiating with himself for hours, no longer waiting for the perfect moment, because the moment had been reduced to something small enough to accept. And over time, those small starts began to stretch. What began as a few minutes often became more, not because he forced it, but because once he was in motion, stopping felt less natural than continuing. And this was something he had never experienced before. The idea that starting could be easier than avoiding, that movement could feel lighter than hesitation. And one afternoon, as he leaned back in his chair after working longer than he planned, he noticed something that made him pause. One of the notes was gone, not moved, not rewritten, but gone, completed. And for a moment he just stared at the empty space where it had been, trying to process what that meant. It was not a big task, it was not life-changing, but it was finished, and that had not happened in a long time. The next day, it happened again. Another note disappeared, then another, slowly, quietly. The wall began to change, not all at once, not in a way that anyone else would notice, but enough for Lucas to feel it, enough for him to see that something real was happening. And with each completed task, something else began to grow, not excitement, not pride, but belief. A quiet belief that maybe he was not the person he thought he was. Maybe he was not someone who could not follow through. Maybe he had just been approaching everything the wrong way. And that realization did not come as a sudden breakthrough. It built gradually, through repetition, through small wins that did not feel like wins at the time, but added up into something undeniable. And for the first time, Lucas was not measuring his life by how much he planned or how much he thought. He was measuring it by what he actually did, even if it was small, even if it was slow. And that shift, from intention to action, from thinking to doing, began to change how he saw himself, not as someone waiting to start, but as someone already in motion. And once that identity began to form, everything else started to follow. In ways he had never expected, weeks turned into something Lucas had not experienced in a long time. Momentum that did not rely on pressure, momentum that did not come from forcing himself into extreme discipline, but from something much quieter and more sustainable. And when he looked at his wall now, it no longer felt like something that judged him. It felt like something he could actually face. The notes were still there, but there were gaps between them now, spaces where tasks used to be, small reminders that progress had happened. And those spaces began to matter more than the notes themselves, because they proved something he had doubted for so long, that he could finish what he started, that he could move forward without needing everything to be perfect. And the most surprising part was not how much he had done, but how different it felt. Before, every task carried weight, every action felt like a test, but now, it felt lighter, almost routine, like brushing his teeth or making coffee, something he did without turning it into a battle in his head. And that shift began to show up in other parts of his life, not just in the tasks on his wall, but in how he approached everything. Emails he had been avoiding, conversations he had been delaying, decisions he had been overthinking. He started the same way, small, simple, without waiting for the perfect moment, and more often than not, once he started, things moved forward on their own. And one evening, as he sat back and looked around his apartment, he noticed something that stopped him for a second. The room felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because the tension that used to fill it was gone, the constant pressure, the silent reminder of everything undone. It was no longer there in the same way, and in its place was something else, something calmer, something steadier, a sense that he was no longer behind his life. He was inside it, moving through it, one step at a time, and For the first time, Lucas did not feel like he needed to catch up. He felt like he was already on his way. And that realization, simple as it was, carried more weight than any plan or system he had tried before, because it was not built on motivation, it was built on action, small, consistent, repeatable action, the kind that did not ask for perfection, only for presence. And as he looked back at the wall one more time, he did not see a mountain anymore. He saw something else entirely, something he could finally handle. And if you had walked into Lucas's apartment that night, you would not have seen anything extraordinary. The desk was still the same. The laptop still sat in the same place. The wall still held its scattered notes. But what changed was something no one else could see, because the real shift was not in the room. It was in how he moved inside it. He no longer paused for hours before beginning. He no longer waited for the perfect plan or the perfect mood. He simply chose one thing, sat down, and started, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for longer, but always enough to keep the motion alive. And over time, that simple pattern did something powerful. It rewrote the story he had been telling himself for years, the story that he was stuck, that he could not follow through, that he needed to feel ready before he could act, because now he had evidence, quiet but undeniable. That action did not come after confidence. It came before it. And as that truth settled in, something else became clear. The problem had never been the size of the list. It had never been the number of tasks or the lack of time. It had been the way he approached them, trying to carry everything at once, trying to prove something with every step, turning simple actions into heavy decisions. And once that weight was removed, once the need to do everything perfectly disappeared, what was left was something almost overlooked, the ability to begin, small, imperfect, but real. And that was the piece that changed everything. Because once you begin, even in the smallest way, the resistance loses its power, the fear loses its voice, and the path forward, no matter how long, becomes something you can actually walk. And as Lucas sat there, looking at the wall one more time, he did not see a list anymore. He saw a series of starting points, each one waiting, not to be conquered, but simply to be entered, one step at a time, one small action at a time. And the truth is, that same wall exists in your life too. Maybe not with sticky notes, maybe not written out in front of you, but it is there, in the tasks you avoid, in the goals you delay, in the plans you keep pushing forward. And the question is not whether you have enough time or enough discipline. The question is much simpler than that. What would happen if you stopped trying to do everything and just started something? Even if it only takes a few minutes.